You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host. As always, this week we continue our Suburb update series. Last week we had Siobhan McHale in talking about the massive growth we've seen in Willagee over the last 4 or 5 years. This week it is another number one agent, and it's a fantastic throwback to episode 8. We had Peter Zambotti, the number one agent in Mount Pleasant, into the studio, and no surprises, 5 years later to the week, he is still the number one real estate agent in Mount Pleasant, talking about how things have gone over the last 5 years. It's really good to look back so we can start looking forward. Peter Zambotti from Mont, thank you very much for coming in, mate.
G'day, mate. Thanks for having me. 5 years, that's insane.
A lot's happened.
I know.
You're a family man these days. You have a kid.
That's it. It's a bit more structured now, but it's such a nice change. So a lot does change in 5 years. Not so much in Mount Pleasant, but personal side, things have taken a turn for the better.
When you say things haven't changed much in Mount Pleasant, I think the outlook has changed quite a bit physically. 5 years ago, you didn't see that many towers. You had Cirque up, Precinct was up, and I think Sabina was going.
Yeah.
Granton hadn't been up, Riviera hadn't been up. There's a few big buildings there looking there, and Sanctuary, for example, on Wren Street in Mount Pleasant's just finished as well. To be frank, the skyline around Mount Pleasant has changed rapidly in the last 5 years with the Canning Bridge precinct plan, hasn't it?
They just needed to get more infill, so I think they chose to really go heavy on one sector, which was that zone. Some love it. Some don't. It does give the downsizers a lot of options. We're selling a lot of the traditional 4x2s on the full blocks, and the downsizers are moving into the smaller boutique complexes. Before they had one or two options, the Raffles, the very small boutique developments that were scattered around. But now we're seeing, Trent, there's so much more options for them depending on their budget and, amenities views. So it's good for them. Some people don't like it because of, it's a lot more congested and they might have a tower on their doorstep, a bit of overshadowing. But I think on the whole, the smaller ones like the Wren Street developments, everyone's pretty happy with those.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see another Sanctuary S come up in a couple of doors.
Yeah, 2 doors down.
Yeah, aren't we? You can see that on the mapping. It's a sandpit right now. It's only one thing it can be. Look, the story over the last couple of years, I think, in the Mount Pleasant, Applecross, Dalkeith, Nedlands price point has really been one that has not been limited by demand, but by supply, by mobility. People are not actually being able to move on from their property because they don't have anywhere to go. Has the advent of the apartment developments that have come through on the Applecross Peninsula soothed that a little bit in the area? It's one thing you can't say in that area, and that is that downsizers don't have somewhere to go now.
Yeah, you're spot on. Before, it was you reach these blue chip riverside suburbs and you want to downsize, but you didn't want to lose your amenities. You didn't want to lose the prestige of the suburb that you've...
The views as well. Yeah,
the views. So now there are those options. People are still getting their head around apartment living because if you're going from a nice home on a full block, you've got a bit of space, you've got lots of storage, you might have multiple cars, caravans. The apartments don't offer that, but they do bring you lock and leave living. They're a bit of a community on the smaller ones. You've got better amenities. So there's pros and cons, but I think that demographic, they've got more options now where they can get a lock and leave base and they're not holding their family home until they go to a care facility. That's what was happening before. They were just staying in the home, getting help.
Getting very old.
And letting things go because they didn't have the option to stay hyper-local.
One thing that also came about with the Canning Bridge precinct plan is rezoning to R60. And we see a select few streets, Gairlock Street, Bombard, Ardross Street,
Ornus,
Tate, these streets around here where we've got an opportunity now to turn that quarter-acre property into the townhouse model where it's 4 or 6 townhouses. How have they been going over the last few years? Because when we spoke again 5 years ago, that had only just kicked off in terms of the rezoning.
Well, I think the ones that you've helped with have done really well, and there's a few more in the pipeline. So they do offer a more of an option for the younger buyers that want the lock and leave living but have the amenities as well. So the ones that we've sold in conjunction with you guys have gone really well. It'll be good to see what the higher spec ones do, but I think that's a positive for the area, certainly.
It's probably allowing some of those younger people to get into the market. Mount Pleasant historically, as you've told us before, is a family suburb. You've seen a lot of families grow up over the years. And unfortunately, the thing that holds a lot of people back when it comes to these price points when you're in the seven-figure spaces, it just hasn't been in Mount Pleasant before that many options for a younger person to go and buy something sub 1 mil.
Yeah, nice, new, double story. You don't need
Lock and leave.
500 squares, 200's fine. So, yeah, I think that's a good thing for the area.
When we think about Mount Pleasant, we also can't forget places like Ardros, Booragoon, Bateman. You sell in those areas as well. Has the story been similar across these suburbs, or can you point out any differences in the performance space across those price points?
Key drivers that we see is really driven the growth on families, and that's on the back of school zones, parks, amenities. It's all really family living, and all those suburbs offer a lot. So they've all done really well in compared to some other suburbs in the area because of the school zone. Some of them have the dual Applecross and Rossmoyne, which is extremely popular. We'll have lines out the door. You'll double your home open attendees if it's in both school zones. The price, if you look at the sales evidence and you don't know the area, if you looked at one side versus the other, one's a dual school zone, the other ones are not. There's a big gap in prices.
Is that Bateman we're talking about?
Yeah, and there's parts of Mount Pleasant, there's parts of Booragoon which hold the dual school zones. And when we get those properties, that's actually not the best part of the area, but it is dual school zone. So we have a lot of the Asian and Indian buyers that will flock to those opens purely because they are really relocating for their kids. You ask, why are you moving here? They say, look, we are just basically doing this for our kids.
Over the last 5 years, we've also seen a big shift in interest rates. We've seen a whole story. Really, it's gone from about 4% down to 2%. Now people are paying 6%. Have you seen a shift in the demandability or the serviceability over that time? I would have thought, if I can preempt you, that 2020 to 2022 period, you would have seen a whole bunch of buyers you'd never seen before come into the market simply because affordability was through the roof. And I would also assume over the last 12 months, especially in Mount Pleasant, you've seen a bit of a contraction of those people who could afford 1.8 and really now are tapping out at 1.3.
We are starting to see people come through and revise their budgets because their borrowing capacity has come down somewhat. So that is coming to effect now. But we thought that last year, the back half of it, the market might drop because, there was the rhetoric of, this mortgage cliff that all the fixed rates were going to expire and, no one could pay their mortgage. Now, all of our suburbs went up from winter to December and they didn't just go up. It was like there was like this little mini boom going on again. So
it's like a shift.
It was a massive shift because everyone was like, the back half's going to be slow, The first half was good and it just kept going and going and going. And we got to Christmas and we're like, wow, the prices, if you look at what you bought in Feb, March, April, it's gone up 10% since then. And if you looked at the metrics, everyone thought it should have gone backwards because people had less money,
less to spend,
but it actually went up. So it just shows to us that our conservative areas at that median price point of give or take $1 million weren't as affected as sub 500, which is obvious economics, but it didn't have, we were getting more people through because of the stock levels were so tight. It did the exact opposite that we all thought.
Well, we talk about stock levels and no one in this state would ever have put their hand on their heart and conscionably expected stock levels to be well below 4,000 properties on the market, let alone 5,000, let alone 7,000 a year ago, let alone 17,000 5 years ago when we lost spot. Exactly right. These days, there's the issue you've got where the dynamic has shifted so much from you really having to work your ass off to sell a property to now you're working your ass off just to keep the underbidders happy, aren't you?
If you sell in the same suburbs, and most people don't move too far, so they've generally got their family close by, friends. We see the same buyers in the same suburbs if they're looking most weekends, and we're getting multiple offers on everything, and sometimes it's in excess of 10 offers. So you've got 9 people that missed out, and I think now for longevity of an agent and to keep your standing in the community is to make sure that everyone's given a fair chance, but also they're treated with respect. And if they don't get it, they're not just pushed to the side. So if you put yourself in their shoes, there's so much invested energy to try and buy a place emotionally and time. So you might not get it, and then you're just so deflated. So half of my week now is dealing with buyers that have missed out and just keeping them so that if we meet them again, they're not jaded or dejected on, oh, that agent treated me like I was a piece of chewing gum and I got a fair chance. So it's now not so much to sell the property. I mean, that is one part of the job, but as the agent,
the easiest part of the job, isn't it?
There's an art to it, but the market is certainly bridging the gap for most agents in these areas. So it's a lot of it is about keeping your relationships and giving everyone a fair crack at it, because it's people don't buy in so often. If they miss out, they remember, and it's how they were treated. So yeah, a lot of our time now is managing expectations of the underbidders and just keeping them in the loop so that they don't miss out next time.
Well, and that reality is important, because one thing we do know is that most buyers are sellers. And we also know that the thing that's hardest at the moment for a selling agent is not so much the selling, it's the listing. And if you can't have your buyers on side who will be sellers in that area, it's a very recyclable suburb, as you said, most people stick to their suburb, then it's unlikely that even if you sell to someone, at some point in time, they're going to like you enough to want to sell with you sometime down in the future as well. You're right, it's all about relationships, continually building that brand of integrity, respect.
Making it easy for a buyer to make a decision, have everything ready, sales evidence, termite inspections, building inspections, easy access to view it, 3D tours, floor plans. Make it easy for them, price guide, so they know, hey, if I'm investing my time, this is in my price bracket, I can afford it, my time is not being wasted here. So
talking about being able to set a price guide, I would have thought things have gotten pretty hard for you. I've seen a lot of evidence recently where the conversation I'm having privately with the real estate agent is that, yep, this is the price guide from 1.2. It starts to progress through the day, and we're at 1.4 now, when the agent's genuinely saying to me, mate, I just don't see how it's worth this. Surely you can agree with me. And I'm saying, well, to be frank, this is what we've been talking about for a few years now. We're so conditioned as Western Australians to expect this stagnant price point where things are worth what they're worth. The soft serve at McDonald's has been worth 30 cents for
forever.
20 years, and now it's $1, and we go, oh, what's the value? Well, at the end of the day, if 8 people put an offer in at 1.4 mil and the guy wins at 1.41 mil, you cannot question that this is now the value. When places around the country other than Perth have been experiencing this for years now, and we're just being fed this harsh reality that the value is the value on a monthly basis now. It's not something we can be used to like we have been with the Macca's soft serve.
Supply and demand, and we'll do an appraisal and we'll look at all the sales, and I always say there's two prices to any home. You know, you've got your mathematical price, like a valuer, you know, beds, bath, car. You look at the sales evidence, and for 10 years it was really stagnant. You could pull up, you know, plenty of comparables, so hey, you're here and you're within a couple of percent, but now you look at the data and you try and price something, and it's like it could be here, it could be all the way over here, and 9 times out of 10 it's on the higher end with some extra, and that's just because there's good quality stock. It's always got a market. That's why I say buy the best thing you can, because that'll run the hardest. Supply and demand is so low, so the most difficult task we have is to give a vendor a price point that's realistic without shooting themselves in the foot and underselling it, because we're really there to maximise the property price, but it is extremely difficult because all the factors sometimes don't add up to what it sells for.
Let's talk about Mount Pleasant a bit more specifically at the moment. 5 years ago, we were just rolling into Mount Pleasant being named number 1 suburb for growth in Western Australia in, I think it was 2020, and that demonstrated a lot of value. The top performing suburbs in that year were Rossmoyne, Riverton, Shelley, Mount Pleasant. There was obviously a real push around the Canning Bridge space at the time. We haven't seen Mount Pleasant specifically hit those top 10 lists since in the last couple of years from a price growth perspective, despite the fact that there's clearly a lot of pressure from a demand side. What do you think the reason is for that? Why haven't we seen the $2 million house selling for $3 million or the $1 million house selling for 1.5?
I think there's pockets of Mount Pleasant which have grown really well, and then there's pockets that haven't. There's a lot of sub-markets within the market. I think it did quite well, so then it went into a bit of a lull, but there is pockets of the market where if you get some stock, you'll have lines out the door where it's fully renovated or it's a brand new house and it's priced well, that will run. But your traditional stock, 80s built family home, it's in a market where buyers will need to spend some money on it and renovate it, and we're seeing the appetite for buyers is ready walk-in stock, and that's what's running. So a lot of the Mount Pleasant stock that's not blue chip river views is that stock that needs some work. And it's just cosmetic work, but people aren't prepared to do it. We're seeing people want new builds or old homes that have been totally renovated and are on point. People just value their homes so much more than they used to pre-COVID.
I think you're right there. I've seen it across the state at the moment where even if that property is a post-war 50s shack that's got the old Jarrah floors, that if you look at the old photos on RP data, you think this is a dump. Suddenly it's transformed into the polished floors and a lick of paint and a new kitchen, and you think this is still a 70-year-old property here that is on 130 square meters of build size. It's not a big house at all. You've got the sunroom out the back still. It's certainly not a house that has a lot of underlying value. It's been fully depreciated. But people are nearly paying new house prices for the 70-year-old house that's been renovated, aren't they?
It doesn't stack up. But it's what it is giving them is time. People do not want to do the dog work anymore.
Why?
They want to move in and get on with it. I think certain amount of people have made some money and they just want to spend it and then enjoy. People do put a lot more emphasis on their home now. Before it was like, oh, you got a roof, this is where I live. But now it's people's, it's their comfort zone, it's their safe space, it's where they spend a lot of time. So people want the nice backyards. They don't want to renovate. They don't want to do up kitchens and bathrooms. They want to just walk in. So whoever is listening out there, if you've got a property that's ready to roll and it's done properly, it'll be very popular in this market. But something that's got good value, good bones, good area, we're not seeing anywhere near the demand for that.
Well, there's the opportunity again, and we've spoken a couple of times now on the podcast about the theme for this year. Lachlan Delahunty put it up. I've echoed that as well. The renovator. If you can buy that house, as you said, that needs a renovation, needs some work, and add value yourself, which is one of the hardest things to do right now, given tradies are so hard to find and they're pretty expensive for their time, then there is value. We are certainly seeing an opportunity there for a renovation on a property, as you said, with good bones, that's ready for a cosmetic lipstick.
We were saying the smart money's on the sidelines at the moment. The developers that we used to hear from in the suburb are pretty quiet. The inquiries, 9 out of 10, are all families. They want somewhere to live and need it ASAP.
You know what's interesting? I've been scrolling through realestate.com looking at Mount Pleasant, and there are more properties on the market in the suburb than I thought there would be. There's 30 of them are apartments that are just coming online, but we've still got 20-something fully detached dwellings there. But the thing that surprises me the most is that nearly all of them are above the sort of 2 to 2.5 mil up to sort of $6 million space. They're not moving as fast as the properties that are below the $2 million space. Is it an affordability thing? Is it an interest rate thing? Or is it simply that people in that price point don't need to move and are happy to wait?
A lot of the more expensive homes, they are a more mature owner and they don't want to rent. So they don't want to sell until they can see what they're going to move into. They don't want to rent and they don't want to deal with buildings. So there's a bit of a landlock because they certainly want to either downsize or get out or liquidate, but they can't see where they're going to go. So a lot of that stock's quite stagnant, where the transient market from sort of 800 to mid ones, high ones is always turning over. But that 2+, there was a run 24 months ago where that was selling all the time. I just find the inquiry on that, it might be affordability, but a lot of them is the downsizer that's going to sell but can't see where they're going to go. That's local, so they just think this is too hard, we're going to sit tight. So we need more stock coming, which will then open everything up and then it will flow a little bit smoother.
Look, this conversation is really enlightening because it does show to everyone listening the different stages in the cycle that different suburbs are at. And within the suburb, again, given Mount Pleasant does represent price points from $600,000-700,000 for a villa all the way up to $6 million sitting
10
or even more, right? Sitting
Close
on the Esplanade 10. There. Yeah. So you can see the different patches within the suburb that are doing well and the patches that are a little bit stagnant and slow. Talking about doing well, you've got an anecdote or two for us on properties that you've been selling very recently that only a couple of years ago were significantly lower in price. This price point, I think, represents that. Go for it.
Yeah, circa 2 years ago, we sold on a main road in Ardros. It was a rear property, and rears are never that popular. Main roads, getting in and out of your driveway is quite difficult. Single garage, very well presented, but we sold it for $695 circa 2 years ago. Over the weekend, 50 groups through, well over 100 people through that in 30 minutes on a 41-degree day. 6 offers, we could have gone to 10+, and you're selling well above the guide price of mid-8s, and it went into the 9s. But 2 years ago, that was selling for $695. They've barely changed it. They've literally painted pulled a couple of pelmets off and put some mulch on the garden, and that just shows that market, and everyone that was coming in, they were young families, and they were buying based on the school zones and the amenities. So that's the push from the bottom, which is then filtering through. But that sub 1 million market in a inner city suburb is mental.
This perfectly represents, I think, the outcome of what's been happening across the state at the moment. The last couple of years, based on that affordability theme, what we've really witnessed is a compression up from the bottom all the way down to your cheapest suburbs in the city of Armidale and the city of Kwinana, where properties were selling for 200, so now selling for 450 now. That filters all the way through because someone eventually goes and sits there and says, hang on a second, I'm spending 400 and something grand in Camillo or Leda or Aurelia, when a couple of years ago it was 200 and something grand. If I'm spending this money here, I may as well pop up to the next suburb. Let's say it's a Thornley, Wellard, for example. And then those people start pushing up. And then it filters all the way through to the point where you get to Mount Pleasant, one of the top suburbs in WA. And they're thinking, hang on a sec. I was looking in Willagee, for example, at $600,000 a couple of years ago. It's now at $900,000. I may as well be in Mount Pleasant
for 100 or 200 more.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what's going on now, where you see that price point run of that compression nearly pushing people to shift up a demographic in their housing expectations.
That's why we're very pro on Mount Pleasant in the next couple of years, because the feeder suburbs or the surrounding suburbs like Cardinia, Ardros, Melville, whatever they are basically at the same price point, and you don't have the name. So people will start, like you were alluding to, there's not much difference between an Alfred Cove price and a Mount Pleasant price. They will go to the Mount Pleasant for the long-term capital growth.
Well, historically there should be, right? There should be that delineation in prices between your Mount Pleasant to your Ardros, to your Alfred Cove, to your Adelaide. You go further down towards your Bulragoon, your Melville, your Bateman, your Brentwoods, Winthrops. The prices have compressed up so much that there really is not a lot of delineation at all, and people are going to start getting wise to this and think, well, I may as well, because this is my opportunity. If I'm going to have to spend this money here, I may as well spend this money in Mount Pleasant.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And I think that's where we're seeing the precipice of the cycle again. We've seen a real run in the third and fourth quartiles over the last couple of years. The first and, to an extent, the second quartile has been left on the wayside since interest rates have moved and since that push has pushed people towards the third and fourth quartile. So that's a poignant perspective bringing you in today to talk about Mount Pleasant, because I think we are on the precipice of seeing suburbs like this, like
having another run,
like, for example, Nedlands, Adelaide, Dalkeith. They've sort of been left on the wayside for the last 12 months as everyone else has been moving. They have been, and that's a story that I don't think many people have been talking about.
People, they look at the market as a whole. There's a lot of markets within the market, and you would have thought a suburb like Mount Pleasant would have had a lot more growth behind it, like it did a couple of years back when we were in here, but it hasn't. It's been the surrounding cheaper suburbs which have jumped considerably, putting the prices on those up across Mount Pleasant pockets.
I would have thought amenity has improved in the last few years in Mount Pleasant as well. When you have more people coming in to support more small business and cafes, what's life like along the cafe strips on Ardros Street and Canning Bridge and those sort of areas?
I remember when Mont started, that was a sleepy suburban little street, and there was like a hairdresser and an old IGA with holes in the wooden floorboards, and it was a strip that no one would go to unless you lived down the road. It was like your little suburban secret street, and now it is the most popular little street. On a weekend, I don't even bother trying to get a coffee at the coffee shop because it's 30 minutes. You can't get a table. You can't even get a car park. It's that popular that the supermarkets have put paid parking now in their car park. And this is a suburban street in the heart of Applecross. So it's a beautiful lifestyle amenity. It has gone from a sleepy little hollow to a bustling little cosmopolitan street, which is fantastic to be based on. That's why we love it there. But that brings people, but it's too popular.
Well, I guess that's what the NIMBYs, what the locals would be saying, straight up complaining about and saying, look, we told you, if you put apartments here and here, it's going to be too popular and we're going to suffer. That is the necessity of progress when it comes to having the best amenity suburbs in Perth. We all need to share a bit more, especially when we're going to be having 90,000 people a year coming into our state.
I think this is going to be an interesting year. No one knows. I mean, last year everyone thought the market was going to cool. It didn't. It went up considerably. This year, we've got so many people migrating. What we found is during 2020, 2021, the builders didn't do a lot. A lot of those construction progress are starting to come out of the ground or nearly finished now. So there's going to be more stock. You've got the migration. It's just going to be very interesting to see what happens with prices. Reba come out yesterday and said 10% growth forecasted for the year. Yeah, it's kind of watch this space, but let's hope we have another great year, but stock unravels and it's a bit easier for people to relocate, to upgrade, to downsize. More choices is just...
Well, look, the days on market in Mount Pleasant is still only 14 days. As you said, the pressure is still there. The number of buyers is still there. I'm very interested to see number one agent Peter Zambotti, how far you can push the price this year in your suburb that you very clearly have had a strong grasp on for many years, based obviously on the great work you do. Let's see if we can get Mount Pleasant's price point right up into that top 10 this year.
Challenge accepted, mate.
Peter Zambotti from Mont Property, thanks for coming in.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!